is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Unlockables podcast, the story of video games, the people who play them, and the memories made along the way. As always, I am your host. My name is Eric. I'd like to thank you so much for tuning in wherever, whenever, in time and space you may be located. It means so much to me that you're willing to stop by the show and check out what is going on in the world of video games. We did it. We made it through another year. This is the end of 2024. And man, this year seemed to fly by faster than ever. Time keeps on slipping into the future. And there are certain life events that are responsible for that I'll elaborate on a little bit later in the episode. But if you listen to the show before, you know at the end of the year, I like to do like a end of year recap where I talk about some of the games that I played, do like a game of the year stuff, and just talk about my general feelings on the show, content creation, all that stuff, and kind of just be a little more human and talk about some of the stuff that I struggle with this year in terms of life, in terms of anxieties around this show that I create, and things like that. I'm not going to do a straight up like game of the year, end of the year show because a lot of people do that. And I just wanted to do a little bit something different. I kind of wanted to just mention all of the games that I played this year and talk a little bit about everything that I did instead of just the one or two specific experiences that I think are game of the year and kind of defined my year in gaming, because I think my year in gaming, especially with all that's happened to me, becoming a new dad, kind of goes beyond just a singular title and me just saying, oh, this is my game of the year 2024. I still will pick one just because that's, the obligatory. You're expected and required to do it. So I will pick a game from 2024 that I think was the best experience this year. But I wanted to go through my games that I played this year by the numbers and just kind of reminisce on all of them because in addition to the game of the year, they did kind of all make up the roadmap of my year and the memories that I made this year. And I think back to when my son was born and the games I was playing around then. And, those games will forever be attached and chained to those memories, not to make a Kingdom Hearts pun in there, chain of memories, but, I got to do it anyways. So I'm going to talk a little bit about every single game that I played this year for 2024. And before I dive into all these games, I kind of split them up into different categories, I guess I was channeling my inner Taylor Swift when I kind of put them in different eras or whatever. But I put them in different categories that I felt that I could talk about them in kind of like a package and not be like, oh, and then I played this game, and then I played that game, and then I played this game. If I put them in different categories, I could kind of talk about them as a whole in relation to a category and kind of pick out specific ones that I played and just offer some of my thoughts. A little bit of more of an unstructured episode here. I have some general notes. Usually my episodes are a lot more scripted, a lot more note heavy, but I'm kind of doing this one off the cuff. I have some general bullet points for everything that I played, but we're just going to kind of wing it and see how long this goes. So the first part of this episode, I will talk about all the games that I played this year. And then the second part, I'll talk about the Unlockables in general, my life experiences now that I am a dad with the show, content creation, some of the anxieties and all the stuff that I do around that stuff. Those episodes have always been pretty popular. And I think it's good for us to, especially at the end of the year when we're reflecting on the previous year, to be okay to wear our hearts on our sleeves and be a little bit vulnerable and just talk about the things that we feel while we do this and while we navigate life while creating and being part of this community. So that will be the episode structure. So without further ado, let's dive into all of the games that I played in 2024. So before I dive into the specific categories that I sorted all of my games into, I wanted to tally up the number of games that I played this year and just kind of break them out into some statistics and see kind of what I was playing, what years they were from, and anything like that. If there anything interesting I could gain by kind of breaking them out into different categories. So for 2024, I set myself a rather ambitious goal that I wanted to play 50 games this year, 50. I've been tracking the number of games I've played and logging them for the last 4 years, and I've never eclipsed 50 games played in a single year, and I wanted to do it this year. And I felt like it was a rather ambitious goal because the previous years I had played 40 games in 2022 and 41 games in 2023. So with a new baby coming into the mix, I wasn't sure how I was going to find time to squeeze 9 more games into into a calendar year, especially when was having a lot of added responsibility coming into my life. But I managed to do it, and I ended up, as of this recording, and there's still some stuff I'm playing, so odds are I'll finish something and it'll make this recording obsolete. But as of this recording, I've played 51 games. 32 of those games were new titles, and 19 of those games were replays, meaning I had played the games before and I had replayed them. So I really like this balance when I kind of broke these games out and sorted them into new games and replays. I really have made an effort the last couple of years to seek out and play new experiences, whether that's been things that I've missed or things outside of my comfort zone that back in the day I just kind of thought, I don't really want to play that. It doesn't really seem like it's for me. I've been trying more and more since I've been content creating and interacting with a wider video game community to seek out new experiences so I have a wider breadth of experience so I can come on and talk about more games, so I can go on and do more shows. And I think seeking out new experiences kind of broadens your horizons and can kind of assist you when you're critiquing and evaluating and thinking about games that you've already played, because a new experience might allow you to look at a game from a different angle that maybe you'd never thought of before. I mean, I've been pretty well entrenched in games like shooters and RPGs, and that was kind of the lens through which I looked at most of my video games experience, because those are most of the games that I ended up playing. But now that I've gone out of my way to play some like horror stuff and play JRPGs outside of Final Fantasy and just games in different genres, it's made me reevaluate the way I think and look at video games and talk about them as a complete package. So I did end up playing more new games and replaying this year, but I also think there is value in replaying experiences that you've already played. I know that it's kind of like a badge of honor to be able to say at the end of the year, oh, I beat like 80 games, or I cleared 80 games off of my backlog. And hey, if that's what you try to do, I think that's great. I think we should try and experience as much new things and engage with as much media as we can while we are on this planet. But I also think there is value in replaying things that you have previously played before. I don't believe in the concept of just playing a game once and setting it to the side and never touching it ever again, because I think video games at their core are meant to be replayed and experienced a few times. I don't think a singular playthrough of a game is enough to really grasp it in its entirety, unless it's like something that's really short. Like Kingdom Hearts 2 is probably my most played game. I've probably played that game once a year, every year since it came out. And through each playthrough, I'm still kind of evolving the way I feel about it and coming up with new things and concepts and realizations of the different themes that are in that game to really kind of come into a new appreciation of it. And I think you can only do that. You can only grow to appreciate a piece of art and a medium of art if you experience it multiple times, because there's no way you're going to remember every single thing or feeling that you had, especially if you only played that game for a couple of hours and then moved on. If it's a shorter game, or you played that game, there's so much content in it, you play it for 80 hours and then you move on and you never touch it again, because time tends to dull memories as you go on. And so if 10 years from now you're trying to like remember an experience and be like, yeah, I played it, this is what I thought about it, your lens and your experience could change because you've played other things. And so you might have a new way of approaching that game to reevaluate it, or have a new way of thinking about it because you experienced other things. So I think there is value in going back to replay your games. I'm not a one and done guy, and I don't just want to play them one time and set them to the side. You know, that's kind of been a struggle with my show. I've wanted to play new things so I can talk about them on the show, but I've also wanted to go back and just play old things and things I've experienced before. I don't think it should just be this rush to like whoever plays the most new games and clears most games off their backlogs, you know, kind of wins the race. I think there is inherent value in playing things that you have played before, and I've managed to strike a fine balance on my show between playing things that I have before and playing new experiences. Replay your games. You don't always have to be playing something new just to be like, oh yeah, I'm playing this new thing and I cleared off this many X number. It's not whoever plays the most number of games at the end of their life and dies wins. I also went and broke down the number of games that I played by year this year. So I went through and broke them down by decades. I had games I played all the way back in the 1970s that I went back and experienced all the way through the current decade, the 2020s. And this is how they broke out. So from the 1970s, I played 2 games. 1980s, I played 3 games. 1990s, 11 games. 2000s, 10 games. 2010s, 12 games. And 2020s, 13 games. The 70s and 80s are a little bit weird there. I'll talk about that when I go through my categories. I kind of went into a weird little like niche in there when I was experimenting and gathering data for a project that I didn't really get off the ground, but we'll talk about that when we get to them. I want to talk about the 90s through the 2020s because there's 4 decades of video games there. And surprisingly, I didn't even mean for this to happen. They kind of all came out exactly the same. So I had 11 games from the 90s, 10 from the 2000s, 12 from the 2010s, and 13 from the 2020s. And that's a pretty even mix across the 4 decades. That's really kind of an equal experience across all the decades that I've been alive in my life. I managed to play almost an equal number of games across all of them. And that really did kind of surprise me because I felt like I'd played a lot of stuff from like the 2010s and 2020s. And I did. That made up almost half of my game playing experience. But the fact that I made more of a conscious effort to go back and play stuff that was older, from the first 2 decades of my life, the 90s and the 2000s, I felt like that was interesting. And like I said, over the last couple of years, I've made an attempted shift to play things that I may have missed back in the day and mix that in with newer experiences that keep coming out. And it's been really rewarding because I feel like playing the older things has led me to appreciate, especially in the lens of like all the great games we're getting now and all the amazing cutting edge games we're getting now. I think playing the modern games and then going back and looking at these older games through that kind of lens has only increased my appreciation of them because we're in this era of video games now where the industry is so bloated. We're spending $300 million building these gigantic games that take hours and hours to complete or want you to play them indefinitely. And when I went back to the 90s and the 2000s, I was really able to appreciate kind of the design philosophies and the way that these games were created as a package because they didn't have that much money. They didn't have unlimited space on a CD. They couldn't just build a game that was 300 gigabytes huge, and they certainly couldn't have a budget that was like $200 million. They had to get these games out on a tight deadline with smaller development teams with less powerful hardware. And I think those limitations breeded some really, really fantastic innovations and made for some really great games as a package. If you listen to the Sly Cooper episode, which was the one that I did with Keaton, I talked about how Sly is a fantastic package, even though it's short. Everything that it does is so clearly defined by the focus on what they're trying to achieve with that game. And that's a kind of focus that you don't really get with games now because they're so humongous and they just try to make them so you spend the maximum amount of time possible in them and fill them with all this like bloated content that doesn't really mean anything. There were no wasted moments in Sly Cooper. Everything was intentional. Everything was designed intentional. It created this really amazing package from gameplay to music to art style that I just feel like we kind of are missing nowadays. There aren't as many games that come out that are like that are put out by like these big AAA developers. The indie devs have really kind of taken that spirit of smaller game design, of more constrained game design, and taken that to the next level. If you just look at a game like Balatro that was nominated for Game of the Year this year, that game is incredible, made by one dude over 3 years and has a very simple but addicting premise. And it's better than most of the large games that came out this year. So I just thought that spread was really interesting. And I think that I was able to split my time equally across all the years that I've been alive and experienced games from the entire breadth of my life. And I just thought that was really kind of cool when I put the numbers down in the years and looked at it, because I've been pretty retrospective this year about my entire life in the wake of my son being born. And so the fact that my game playing habits kind of mirrored that was a reflection of my mindset for most of this year was pretty cool. So with those ramblings, let's go into the categories and all of the games that I played this year. I broke them up into the different categories. category. How did I end up playing 3 Pokemon games? And the games in this category are Pokemon Black version, Pokemon Omega Ruby, and Pokemon Scarlet. It seems like I always find myself playing at least one Pokemon game every year, which is interesting because I don't ever really try to go out of my way to play them, but I end up doing that anyways. But this year I ended up playing 3 of them. So for Pokemon Black, the reason I wanted to play that one was I've been wanting to revisit Gen 5 for some time. It's probably my favorite generation since 2. It probably has the strongest narrative. Not that narrative goes super deep into a Pokemon game. That's a low bar there. Unova is one of my favorite regions. I just really think that Gen 5 overall is really, really strong. And I consider Gen 5 kind of like the second wave of Pokemon. Like we kind of got 1 through 4, and then with 5 it kind of started to go off in a different direction. So I would say after Gen 2, Gen 5 is probably my favorite. Omega Ruby, I obviously played for the show. I hope you listened to that episode. I ended up doing a Nuzlocke run with Adam from The Good, the Bad, and the Backlog, and we had a really, really awesome conversation around Nuzlocke and Pokemon Challenge and just our experience with that as a whole. I want to go back and play more Nuzlocke, so I'm already kind of planning next year what I want my Pokemon Nuzlocke playthrough to be. And I may do a follow-up episode, and I may add some more difficult rules because I had a really good time. And I think a Nuzlocke, when you add rules that restrict the gameplay of Pokemon, it really makes the game shine more when you make it more difficult. It makes you appreciate a little bit more of the systems that are in play there. And then as far as Pokemon Scarlet goes, I don't really know why I went back and replayed this one. I had no intention of revisiting Scarlet. I kind of ended up doing that out of sheer curiosity because I played it 2 years ago, and I think at the time I put out an episode with Jared and with Tyler, Jared of Play Along Podcast and Tyler of Switch It Up, and I think we had some positive things to say about Pokemon Scarlet, but I had overall felt unsatisfied with my playthrough. So considering that I played 2 Pokemon games this year already that I felt like in terms of the Pokemon series were 2 of the best games, I wanted to go back and play Scarlet and see if my opinions on the Paldea region had changed. And it sort of did. I can recognize that as far as a Pokemon game goes, Scarlet has good bones. I mean, at its core, it's still a Pokemon game, and Pokemon games are always like that. The core gameplay is always just kind of fun to play and addictive, but I can't excuse how much of a mess Pokemon Scarlet is. It chugs more often than not. It jitters and jerks along like a car with a flat tire. I don't know if it's poorly optimized. I don't know if it's just too big to run on the Switch. It's probably a combination of both of those things, but there's really no excuse that Game Freak or Nintendo can give for them putting out a game like this in such a state. I think, Pokemon fans spread such a large breadth of ages and genders now because Pokemon has been around for, north of 25 years. And I just feel like for as much money as myself and other fans have given the Pokemon Company and Game Freak and Nintendo over the course of our lives, that we have the right to say, hey, we deserve a better product. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that in that critique or that analysis. So yeah, I don't want to ramble about Pokemon Scarlet forever, but that's how I feel about it. Odds are for 2025, I'll probably be playing more Pokemon next year. I think the follow-up to Legends Arceus, Legends Z Alpha, is coming out next year. And I assume that I will probably be playing that, whether that is on the new Nintendo Switch console. We'll have to see. I don't know. We still have not heard anything about that. I could have swore that we would have at least heard something about that by the end of this year, but it doesn't look like we're going to. next category I titled Look at All Those Kingdom Hearts Games. And this category consists of Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance HD, Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep A Fragmentary Passage, Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, Kingdom Hearts HD 2.5 Remix, and Kingdom Hearts 3. I won't spend too much time talking about these. I've already talked about this series extensively, exhaustively, for like 40 hours at this point. I will say that it's poetic that I'm revisiting my favorite games as I raise my first child. It kind of changes your perspective on everything, and it's definitely changed my perspective on these games as well. As, again, I found myself being in a very retrospective, a very reminiscing mood this year overall. You might be surprised to see Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix on this list because I already played that game, but all the Kingdom Hearts games came out on Steam Deck, and I bought them all for $70, which, again, if you didn't get that deal, what an absolute steal. You should definitely have jumped on that. I also kind of cheated as well because I counted the 2.5 collection as its own game. Because I completed all the games in the 2.5 collection separately. So I felt like I was justified in counting the collection as well as all the games individually because I had spent probably 60 to 70 hours with all the games in that collection. I didn't do this for the 2.8 collection because there's actually only one full game in there, which is Dream Drop Distance HD. 0.8 might as well be a tech demo for Kingdom Hearts 3, and Keyback Cover is obviously a movie, so I felt justified counting 2.5 remix, but not 2.8, because the contents of 2.8 are significantly less. Kingdom Hearts 3, just to touch on that real quick, I did 6 fucking episodes on that game and made my thoughts and feelings on it pretty extensively clear. While Kingdom Hearts 3 is not the end of Guiding Keys, it really felt like a culmination of a lot of the work I've done over the past 2 years of the show's existence. It was really, really cathartic to finally revisit that game and put some of the demons and some of the thoughts I had about it to rest. And I kind of gave my reasoning at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3 Part 6 as to why I felt the way I did about that. So you can go and listen to that if you want me to break that down a little bit more. I still have my gripes about Kingdom Hearts 3, but I'm not going to let that stop me anymore from saying that this is a great game in its own right. And I think that represents a lot of character growth on my end from 2019, especially as it comes to being a creator on the internet who analyzes and critiques video games. And just as a person as a whole, as my mental and physical and emotional maturity, I thought I had kind of grown into who I was already when Kingdom Hearts 3 came out. I mean, I was 28 at the time when I finished that game and it came out. But I think this made me realize that growth isn't like in stages. It's constant. It's continual. It's something you strive for every day to grow into a better person who has a better understanding of whatever it is you're trying to do in life, whether that's playing video games and evaluating them or doing art, playing music, any of that kind of stuff. Growth is continual, and you chase that and strive for that every day. I would say that stagnation relates a lot to probably some mental troubles, and I certainly am not innocent of that. I've definitely felt stagnation over these past 5 years, and it's affected me mentally and caused me to go to therapy and think about stuff. But having a family and doing life has changed me and caused me and forced me to grow even more. And it's made me more appreciative of what things are as a whole in the state that they exist and my likes as a whole, if that makes sense. In the arcade is the next category, and this category contains the following games: Radar Scope, Donkey Kong, Galaga, Galaxian, and Space Invaders. So I mentioned at the top, this was the weird rabbit hole, the games that were from the 70s and 80s. I went down this rabbit hole at the beginning of the year, and you might think this is cheating because you don't really beat arcade games, they're designed to like be played forever. So how can you count them on a list of games and say that you beat them this year? Well, I played these games extensively I put like 5 to 10 hours in each of these games, like extensively for like a couple weeks straight. So I feel comfortable saying that I put the time in so I can add them to my list of games that I can say, hey, I beat these this year. So again, this was part of me doing some very early initial research for a new miniseries I had an idea for, but that never really came to fruition because this was like around the time when my son was born, and then I was just like, oh, I don't have time to pursue this specific idea right now. So I kind of had to shelf it, and I don't know if I'll ever come back to that anytime soon. Still, me personally, I don't have a lot of experience with arcade games. When I was growing up, by the time I got into arcades had kind of transitioned from going there, putting in quarters and playing like Street Fighter and all these games with your friends to games that you played to get tickets, and then you exchange tickets for prizes. That was kind of the route that arcades went. There was an arcade in my town where you could play like skee ball and all these other games, and you get tickets. It was attached to a mini golf course, and then you'd redeem those tickets for prizes. That's what arcades were when I was growing up. So even though I didn't use this gameplay, this research for my project I was working on, it was still kind of cool to go back and experience an earlier age of video games in the midst of a year when my son was born and in the midst of a year when I was playing way too many gigantic RPGs. We'll get to those in a little bit. Radarscope and Donkey Kong in particular have an interesting linked history alongside Shigeru Miyamoto. And both of those games are important stepping stones / through lines to what would eventually be Super Mario Brothers. You can kind of connect from Radarscope to like Shigeru Miyamoto and Donkey Kong and all this other stuff to what would eventually become Super Mario Bros. And then that affected the industry as a whole. The other thing I discovered in my research is that it should not be understated how important Space Invaders is to video game history. Just playing it and doing some of the research around that game made me really understand and appreciate what a landmark game that was, how it kind of defined early arcades and early console gaming, and that there are so many Space Invader-like games that came out after Space Invaders hit the scene. It's absolutely insane. Some of these arcade games are rough to go back and play today because they're designed with different philosophies. Of course, they were designed primarily to make money in the arcades that they were in, so there had to be a component where if the game was too easy and people could just complete it, then they wouldn't continue to put quarters into it. So when thinking about games and evaluating games like this, I think that's an important component that you have to consider. But of course, when you're going back and looking at them through the lens of a more modern, contemporary audience, of course, they're going to be rougher. I mean, today's standards are just so much higher. But in the context of the time, when you were walking through your local arcade and just seeing this stuff, it must have felt like absolute magic. And I've started doing some more research and reading some more books and listening to some more audiobooks about kind of like the earliest points in video game history and Atari and kind of what that was like living at the time. That must have felt the way technology developed so rapidly from post World War II to like the 70s and 80s must have felt almost like magic. I mean, we went from it was like a span of like 50 years. We went from like having the first planes fly to like going into space. And then after World War II, we have TVs. And then within 20 years, you have devices that you could move stuff on your TV, and you could go into an arcade and put a coin in a machine and then have a joystick move something around on a screen. Like, that must be insane. And it kind of blows my mind. It makes me more appreciative of all the things that our grandparents have seen and the advances throughout their lifetime must be kind of bewildering. I mean, it's different for us because we were born into it, and we've basically seen technological innovation ever since we were young. So you have things like the internet, personal computers, and then the internet, and then laptops, and then smartphones, and iPod Nanos, and streaming, and all that stuff. It's kind of just been a constant barrage of innovation since we've been growing up. And we were born in that. We were used to it. But our grandparents didn't necessarily, you know, during the Great Depression and World War II, that must have felt like the fucking end times for them. And then for them to emerge on the other side of that and then see all this stuff happen, pretty crazy when you think about it. Next category I have is all aboard the hype train, and the games in this category are Helldivers 2, Space Marine 2, and Balatro. So, if you know me, I often bemoan hype as one of the main problems in the video game industry today. Hype really pushes people and deadlines to unrealistic standards, and it's my personal belief that if things in the industry and in gaming communities just slowed down a little bit, that would be a lot better. If people learn to just manage their expectations a bit, and if they just calmed the F down, things would be a lot better. But like most, I am certainly not immune from hype affecting me, and I fell victim to it on 3 separate occasions this year. So the first being Helldivers 2. I put out an episode where I talked about Helldivers 2 and live service games as a whole in relation to the industry earlier this year, but Helldivers 2 was the closest thing this year that felt like it was an experience reminiscent of older gaming phenomena like Pokemon or Halo or Pokemon Go. They had announced Helldivers 2, and I remember seeing some like trailers about it. I don't remember seeing much chatter about it, but to me it feels like this game came out of nowhere and went absolutely viral. I was bombarded on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube Shorts by like short minute clips of just absolutely batshit crazy things happening in Helldivers 2. And I rallied a couple of my friends together and we played this game religiously for a few months. We could not suppress the urge to spread managed democracy across the stars and to fight for Super Earth. Well, Helldivers 2 has experienced the growing pains of a new live service game over the course of this year, making people mad about PlayStation sign-ins, some not-so-great updates. It's incredibly fun. It knows what it wants to do, and it does it well. It has a really clear design focus, and I think after some stumbles of going through the ebbs and flows of being a live service game, I'm hoping that they've arrived on what they want the game to be. I think they just launched a new update for it post-Game Awards, adding in the new faction, the Illuminate. So I really want to find some time to dive back in and check that out. Helldivers 2 also kind of holds a special place in my heart this year because it was a comfort to me when my son was born. My son was born at 35 weeks old, so 5 weeks early. And he had to stay in the NICU for almost 4 weeks. For if you don't know what that is, it's the Natal Intensive Care Unit, I think is what that stands for. And somebody can, but it's where your baby goes if it needs like extra help and extra care, be on like in an incubator, have tubes to help it breathing, that kind of stuff. And during that time, I would return home in my evenings to rest for work for the next day because I was still working. I didn't take my days off so that I could take them when he was finally ready to come home. So returning to my house at night was challenging because I felt bad that I was leaving my new son in the hospital and I couldn't be there for him. And, you know, I turned to video games once again to be kind of an escape from those feelings. During those nights, my friends invited me to play Helldivers 2. And that game was an escape. It was a comfort during those times that I couldn't be at the hospital with my child. In the similar vein to Helldivers 2, I fell for the Space Marine 2 hype. I had basically no exposure to Warhammer 40K. That all changed with this game. Again, it got fed to me in TikTok videos and all that kind of stuff, so that the algorithm is extremely efficient in extracting money from you and aligning you with with things that you like. I thought this was going to be a Helldivers 2-like game where you're just fighting hordes of monsters and stuff like that, because in the trailers and the gameplay, like that's what I saw, was just you fighting hordes of the Tyranids. And I was caught off guard when there was like a rich story, and I had no idea that Warhammer had such like a rich lore behind it. The lore of the grimdark universe of Warhammer 40K is massive beyond comprehension. I have watched and listened to like some multi-hour long videos on some of the key lore points of the game, and I still would say I've just scratched the surface of the story of Warhammer, of the lore of Warhammer. Space Marine 2 is reminiscent of the gritty 360 PS3 era in the best of ways. It's been favorably compared to Gears of War, and while I don't enjoy making such simple comparisons for the sake of simplifying critique and discussion, for this episode, as I'm just kind of running down the games I played, this describes the game at its core. The game's core mechanics are fun, and it's an insane power fantasy to play as a hulking Space Marine. That's all you need to know. It's another one of those games that has a focus, has an objective, and it fulfills that objective well. And everything in that game goes towards making you feel like you're in a Warhammer experiences. The locations are huge, the Space Marines are huge, the enemies you fight are huge. Everything in Warhammer, in Space Marine 2, is exaggerated in the best possible way. Finally, Balatro. Oh, Balatro. I hated you, yet I loved you with a rabid passion. I heard of Balatro earlier in the year, but I never really checked it out. I've been trying to get into and play more indie games. Again, I don't just have money to be buying all these things, and I will say I have leaned on emulation to play a lot of games this year, but that changed upon Balatro's nomination for Game of the Year at the Game Awards. I could no longer resist my curiosity, and I remember I downloaded Balatro on my Steam Deck at like 8 p.m. one night, and the next thing you know, like I checked my phone. I was laying on the couch. I spent some nights sleeping on the couch while my son sleeps on my side of the bed. I looked at the clock, and it was 3 p.m. I played the game for like 7 hours straight, and I was unable to put it down. So since then I've managed to control my Balatro addiction, but I did not expect that to grab me the way it did. I get the hype. It's addictive and fun in the simplest and best way possible. There are an infinite number of interesting strategies. It's grabbed me in a similar way to how Vampire Survivors did, and I think that's what ended up surprising me, because I thought after Vampire Survivors grabbed me, I would be more guarded against becoming obsessed with a game like that, but it got me again, and I totally get why Balatro was nominated for Game of the Year. Again, it's a smaller game that's essentially poker, and it has an incredible focus, and it nails what it sets out to do as a game in every aspect, from its presentation to its gameplay to its music, and I think that's incredible. If you're going to check out Balatro, which I recommend you do, make sure you have some time cleared in your schedule, because you will lose the first evening, the first stretch of time that you download it and play it for. I guarantee it. Category I have is titled Too Many RPGs. And the games in this category are Golden Sun, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Persona 5 Royal, Dark Deity, Suikoden 2, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. I did not have time to be playing all of these RPGs this year, but here I am. And this is the category in which I've played the most games by far. There are 7 of them in this category. They would have been more, except I separated the Kingdom Hearts games into their own category. For some reason, earlier this year, I thought that it was an amazing idea to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Persona 5 Royal at the same time. And I don't know why that was. And I said after that, I needed to take a break from RPGs. But guess what? I didn't do that because I just kept playing more and more of them for some goddamn reason. I originally played Golden Sun back towards the start of the year with the intention of going on a bonus episode of the Main Quest podcast and talking about that game with Keith. That didn't happen because I'm a bad friend and I was too busy. So, Keith, I'm still really sorry that I didn't make it onto that episode, but I'll give you some of my thoughts about it here. There's something super nostalgic about Golden Sun. It's really cool to have like a quality SNES RPG on the go with your Game Boy Advance. I think the combat system is really good. I think the world is intriguing. The presentation and the music are fantastic, but I gotta say, this game is so goddamn chatty. There's so much dialogue to read. Like every scene with dialogue is like multiple minutes long. And I don't always mind that, but I think that kind of caught me off guard because I expected it to be a more efficient RPG because it was on the Game Boy Advance. But goddamn, do those characters talk a lot. I think Golden Sun is pretty good. It's just there's so much dialogue. There's so much dialogue. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was a fantastic follow-up to 7 Remake. I'm not quite sure what everybody's opinion is on 7 Rebirth. I have mostly been exposed to positive feelings about it, and I really enjoyed it because this is really kind of like my first time diving headfirst into the world of Final Fantasy VII, even though I've played 7 once before. That was a long time ago, and had a little bit of experience to the overall compilation of Final Fantasy VII with Advent Children. I never really immersed myself in that world and spent time with those characters. So now that I've gotten to do that in 7 Remake and Rebirth, I think that those are both really good games and I'm enjoying my time with them. I was really worried how Remake was going to make the transition to Rebirth, knowing that Rebirth was going to cover the portions of the game where the world opens up and we'd have a lot more freedom. I was really worried about that transition. I was worried about how they're going to keep the gameplay fresh. I was worried about if they're going to be able to balance time for all the characters in the party to kind of shine and have their own character arcs and character growths. And I think for the most part, my fears were unfounded. I think they were able to nail the aspects of transitioning this game to like a more wide open world. And while I don't love all of the open world elements, how we have like the Ubisoft towers and stuff like that, they filled this game to the goddamn brim with extra stuff to do that's not the main story quest. Although I will say that sometimes it feels like it takes a long time to get to the different story beats, especially if you're stopping to do a bunch of the side content along the way. And I don't think all the side content is spectacular. I think there's a spectrum there. A lot of the mini games I feel like are really good. Some of them are kind of meh, and then others I don't really care for at all. But I think as a whole package, and I think is how this remake trilogy is turning out to be, I think 7 Rebirth is a fantastic middle entry. In traditional trilogies, the middle entry is usually like the one where there's some kind of catastrophic defeat or it ends on kind of like a cliffhanger where the hero's victory is kind of left in question. And I think Rebirth kind of fits that traditional second trilogy entry. The ending of this game, if you want to hear me talk about it, I put out an episode of 7 Rebirth where you can go and listen to that. There's spoilers in there, but the ending of 7 Rebirth, I felt a little bit frustrated with for the same reason that I felt frustrated with the end of Kingdom Hearts 3. And that's really all I'll say about that. If you want to hear my thoughts on 7 Rebirth's ending, please go and listen to that episode. But I think overall, as a package, 7 Rebirth is probably the best Final Fantasy thing to come out in the last 10 or so years. And that's the way I feel about it. Persona 5 Royal. I had super high expectations going into this one because for the last like 7 years, people have been telling me, dude, if you love RPGs, you got to play Persona 5. It's like the best new RPG of its generation. So my expectations were super high for Persona 5 going into it. And I started playing it during our lengthy stay in the hospital while our son was born. I had it on my Steam Deck and I proceeded to finish it over a 3-month stretch while I was finishing 7 Rebirth and starting Kingdom Hearts 3. Usually, if I have that high expectations for something, things tend to fall just a little bit short just because nothing can ever live up to those high fantastical expectations you build up over the years about hearing how great something is consistently for 5, 6, 7 years. But Persona 5, I get it, and I think it mostly met those expectations. It was a fantastic JRPG, and I feel like it's probably one of the new standards for a modern RPG/JRPG experience. The only thing that kind of wrinkled me a little bit, and this is just a difference in culture, is some of the Japanese-ness of the game that I still don't think translates fully over to a Western audience. But again, that's more of a cultural thing. That doesn't wreck the game at all. That's not like me hating on it and being like, oh, because it's not geared towards Western, it has some of these weird like Japanese quirks in it, it's a bad game. It's not. That's just a cultural difference that I don't feel like translates to me and my personal tastes. Dark Deity was a GBA Fire Emblem style game, it's not a GBA game. Dark Deity, I bought it on Steam, but it's in the style of the GBA Fire Emblem games. I came across this game on Twitter, and the maker was showing off animations for the sequel, Dark Deity 2, that I think should be coming out like next year sometime. And I love the GBA Fire Emblem games, and it was in that style. So I picked it up and played it. I think it's a rough concept for Sword and Axe LLC's first game, but everything that makes the GBA Fire Emblem games great is present there, and it has a ton of replayability just because of its class system and the different ways you can approach different things in the game. And I can't wait for the sequel. The sequel looks much improved from what I've seen of it on TikTok and the short videos that I've seen it in being promoted. And it looks to fix and address a lot of the issues I had with the first game. So I will definitely be picking up the sequel when it comes out, and I can't wait to play it. So I grouped these last 3 into one talking point here, and that is Suikoden 2, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. This was part of my continued crusade to play more RPGs, and I think it resulted in 3 pretty great experiences. Suikoden 2 was a highlight of my year. It improved on nearly all of my complaints from Suikoden 1, and it told a heart-wrenching story. I think it's a perfect representation of what the genre was as a whole for the vast majority of the 90s. Something that wasn't Final Fantasy VII and post-Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy Tactics was the first ever community game of the month, and I gotta say, I was not prepared for this game. It's a fantastic game in every aspect, from music to gameplay to characters to narrative, but be prepared to be challenged. It's a difficult tactics game, and I consider myself a veteran of the tactics genre, and I found myself struggling with this game. But again, it's a fantastic package, and I think it's worth checking out. Maybe just check out War of the Lions. The localization of the translation is a little bit better, and I think it has a couple quality of life things in there that probably make it the definitive experience. I played it on the PS1, but I think if you play the War of the Lions on the PSP version or whatever the re-release version is, I think that will be just fine. Lunar was my least favorite of these 3, and while I think it's a good time, I don't think it quite reaches the heights of Suikoden or Tactics. I love the presentation, I love the combat, I love the story, and I love the music. I just felt like as a package, the story it was trying to tell in the way it was trying to tell it, and the combat didn't quite live up to Tactics or Suikoden 2. I just loved everything that Lunar did. I could look at Tactics and Suikoden 2 and a couple of the other games I played this year and say those games did that better. Now, in talking to some people about this game, I've heard that the original version of the game, Lunar Silver Star, which came out in 92, and even the Saturn version of Silver Star Story Complete in 96 seem to be the better versions of this game. I played the PS1 version, so it might be worth my time checking out those to kind of see what some of the differences are. So I think Lunar is a fantastic example, like Suikoden, of RPGs that were like pre-Final Fantasy VII, because Silver Star Story Complete is essentially a remake of the original Lunar back in 92. I think it was on the Sega CD. I think it was. Don't put words in my mouth if I'm remembering. I don't have it right in front of me, but yeah. I still think those three things were great, and I'm continuing on my crusade to play other non-Square Enix RPGs and other non-mainline Final Fantasy RPGs and Kingdom Hearts RPGs, just to get a fuller breadth of experience of what the genre has to offer. The next category is titled Holy Shit, I played 4 Sonic games this year. And this category contains Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Sonic X Shadow Generations, Sonic Cross Shadow Generations. I don't know. I never meant for this to happen. I don't know how it happened. If you would have gone back to the beginning of the year, been like a time traveler, and tell me, hey, Eric, you're going to play 4 3D Sonic games this year, I would have laughed at you because I had no intention of doing that. But somehow I ended up playing 4 Sonic games this year and watching both of the movies that I hadn't seen yet. And that makes 6 total Sonic experiences this year. And I'm very tired. No, I'm just kidding. So let's get some things out of the way. I think Sonic hate is way overblown. And in terms of the games I played this year, I will attempt to talk through my feelings towards Sonic because I have done my fair share of making fun of Sonic as a whole, and I kind of feel bad about it. So let's start with the origin of 3D Sonic, being Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. Do these games have issues? Yes. But are they the war crime catastrophes that people make them out to be? No. And for the time, they were pretty iconic and important games. I feel like they were important for the Dreamcast. They were important for Sega. They were important for 3D games as a whole. And they are still the blueprint, the foundation for 3D Sonic to this day. And in one of the games that I played this year, Sonic X Shadow Generations, is still based on the basic gameplay formulas that were established in Adventure 1 and Adventure 2. Shadow the Hedgehog, on the other hand, is a war crime catastrophe. And listen, I'm the most positive I can possibly be about video games. Shadow is not a good video game. It controls like a permanent ice level. The homing attack never works. Narratively, it's all over the place. Thematically, it's absolutely insane that Shadow has a gun and they decided to go the route of an alien invasion. I get trying to make it like a choose your own adventure morality thing for Shadow, but narratively it just creates a confusing mess as to like what his character arc actually is. There was not really a single moment I enjoyed about Shadow the Hedgehog other than I got to do an episode on it with Keith of Main Quest, and that was a pretty fun episode. I've been logging all the games I've ever played, and there are only 2 games that I've given the worst rating, which is 1 star. I refuse to give a 0 star. You can give a 0 star technically, but I refuse to just because I feel like 1 should be the lowest. So there are only 2 games that I've given the worst rating 1 star in the numerous amounts of games that I've played across my life. One is Shadow, and the other is Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. Those are the only 2 genuine gaming experiences I can say that I did not enjoy in the slightest. Now we go to probably my favorite Sonic experience I had this year, which was Sonic X Shadow Generations. That game absolutely fucking rules. It's probably the most well-executed 3D Sonic game on the market, at least from the 3D Sonic games that I have experienced so far, which are only limited to this year and only limited to these 4 games. It represents the fullest potential of what I think the Sonic Adventure style 3D game could be. And then the added shadow content kind of redeems the train wreck of his game, because you get to replay a lot of those Shadow the Hedgehog levels, but in this Sonic X Shadow Generations engine and with his added gameplay stuff, I think it really redeems what Shadow could have been and kind of reestablishes him as a major player in the Sonic universe. Maybe we'll get like a traditional remake of his game, or something where he gets to step into the starring role again. And I think they need to use what they built in Shadow Generations for any future Shadow project that they do. So Sonic X Shadow Generations is a great celebration of Sonic's past. I think the Shadow Generations part is a great addition to the Year of Shadow. And so far, it seems that the Year of Shadow is much more successful than the Year of Luigi. I don't know. We wanted to compare those two, but he has a movie coming out in a couple of. By the time this episode's out, the movie will already have come out, and from early buzz about it, it seems to be a pretty great movie. So, yeah, Shadow the Hedgehog doing Shadow the Hedgehog things during his year that is dedicated to him. I have a subcategory of the holy shit I played 4 Sonic games this year that I just called Sega. And there were 2 additional games that didn't really fit anywhere else, so I kind of put them in this subcategory of Sega underneath this holy shit I played 4 Sonic games this year category. The first is Power Stone, and the second is Soul Calibur. And these 2 games kind of represent the coolest part of this year, and that was getting to spend a decent amount of time with the Sega Dreamcast. This was a console until previously. This was a console that I had literally zero experience with until this year. The only time I'd ever seen it or ever even like contemplated it was seeing it in like department stores and Best Buy and all that stuff. Before it was literally obliterated by the PlayStation 2 and Sega's bad management. I'm sure that has something to do with it. And then from that time on, the Dreamcast was always that system that was like the demise of Sega. Power Stone is a neat game. I don't really have too much to say about it. It was a cool idea for the time, and I feel like a lot of the games on the Dreamcast had like really cool ideas. Soul Calibur, however, I have a bit more to say. I played Soul Calibur 2 and Soul Calibur 4, I think it was, whichever one had the Star Wars characters in it. So, and I owned both of those games, so I consider myself a fan of the series. I mean, I didn't buy a lot of fighting games. I've never bought a Tekken game. I've never bought a Street Fighter game, but I have bought 2 Soul Calibur games, and that has to count for something. So after learning a little bit more about video game history and about the Dreamcast itself, it made me realize how incredible of a game Soul Calibur 1 is, not just for the Dreamcast, but for video games in general. For its time, if you were able to transport yourself back to 1999, 1998, whenever it first came out, Soul Calibur looked fantastic for a 3D game. Fantastic. And it plays as good as it looks. It was probably the best looking game on the Dreamcast. It might even be the best looking 3D game of that era. It's absolutely incredible. And the thing that's nuts about Soul Calibur is that from the time that kind of arcades took over as being the main medium in which you play video games, home console gaming had always been chasing the premier experience of the arcades because arcade cabinets were bigger. They could offer a higher quality product. It wasn't something that you put in your home, so they didn't have to make compromises to make it an affordable box for you to put in your home and plug into your TV. So for the longest time, home console video games had been chasing the promise of the arcade experience in your living room. And I have to say, Soul Calibur takes that milestone and smashes it with a sledgehammer. Soul Calibur not only fulfills that promise, it is probably the first time that everybody collectively looked at a video game and was like, holy shit, this looks better than it does in the arcade. And that is a gigantic and huge milestone for the video game industry. Probably the nail in the coffin for arcades as a whole, because we can have a similar experience in our living room that's affordable. So Soul Calibur was absolutely a treat that I did not expect to play this year, but I'm glad that I did, and it's an incredible game coming from a person that does not play a lot of fighting games. The next category I have is simply titled Nintendo Power. This is just a list of Nintendo games that didn't really fit anywhere else together, and I always find myself playing a lot of Nintendo games through the year. So in this category, we have Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, Mario Kart Super Circuit, Star Fox 1 and 2, Donkey Kong Country 2, and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Like I said, pretty standard suite of Nintendo games that I played this year. I'd played all these games at one time or another, but this was my first time completing all the way through Yoshi's Island, Star Fox 1, and Star Fox 2. Star Fox 1 is interesting. It looks pretty rough today. It's pretty hard to go back to just because of the way it looks. I think I jokingly referred to it as Geometry Wars because it just looks like shapes and polygons flying around shooting each other. But I think the crazier story is around Star Fox 2 and how we finally got that game after Nintendo effectively shelved it. It was put out on the Super Nintendo mini console that they put out, and then Nintendo added it to their Switch Online services. I can't think of another example where a game that was like worked on or effectively finished around like that long ago debuted so many years later and they put it out in a working state. I think that's utterly fascinating that Nintendo decided to do that. And I think I played both these games with the intention of kind of exploring that aspect of it for a future episode. But I think, again, I probably just shelved that episode because I was just running out of time for all the things that I wanted to do this year. Donkey Kong Country 2 was another game that I was supposed to go on a show for, but I got too busy and unfortunately had to cancel. I will say this about Donkey Kong Country 2, and I was of the mindset of a lot of people that Donkey Kong Country 2 is the best of that trilogy, but I think I changed my mind. I think Donkey Kong Country 1 is better. I like the themes and the levels and all that stuff of Donkey Kong Country 2. I think as a package, it does a lot of things great, but holy shit, there are some insane difficulty spikes towards the latter third of the game that really pissed me off for Donkey Kong Country 2. And I think kind of made me take a few points away from it just because it had such a great thing going for it. And then it just has this crazy difficulty spike that kind of puts a sour taste in your mouth. And then it adds in this insane amount of like collectibles and tracking everything down. And some of these collectibles require you to have like advanced knowledge of the maps and make these ridiculous leaps of faith to try and get them all to unlock like the secret world and like the true ending of this game, that it's just a pain in the ass. And I didn't end up liking it as much as I remembered. So I think in the Donkey Kong Country power rankings, I think the first game is better than the second game. And then in terms of Echoes of Wisdom, you'll hear me talk about Echoes of Wisdom at a later date. I'm planning a project with that. So stay tuned to hear me talk about Echoes of Wisdom. Cool 2D Zelda game. Really liked it. That's all I'll say about it right now. first category I titled Video Game Ass Video Games. These are just games that were just like, oh yeah, this is a fucking video game. That's kind of how I felt about them. And in this category, I put Dynasty Warriors 3, 4, and 5, Castle Crashers, Destiny 2, Beyond Light and Lightfall, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and Spider-Man 2. This was kind of a catch-all category for... I'm sure I could have split these games out into a bunch of different categories, but they didn't really fit well in any of the other categories. And I didn't want to have just a bunch of categories where it was like, oh, one game here, two games here. So I put all these categories in the video game video game category because that's just how I feel about them. So let's start with Dynasty Warriors. I played the PlayStation 2 Dynasty Warriors games, so 3, 4, and 5. And man, Dynasty Warriors rules. I have no notes. I have no criticisms. I have no critiques. These games are like the perfect video game video games. If you need a game where it's just like you want to go on a crazy power fantasy and like mess up a bunch of dudes and like fight a bunch of battles and reunite ancient China, this is the game to do it. This is the ultimate power fantasy game. This is the ultimate, I had a bad day at work, I can come home and turn on Dynasty Warriors and just F up a bunch of dudes and turn my brain off for like 2 hours, and I'll feel a lot better about myself. Dynasty Warriors is amazing. I will take no Dynasty Warriors slander in the chat. Please and thank you. We are moving on. No notes. Same thing with Castle Crashers. Castle Crashers rules. I have played through and completed Castle Crashers so many times I've lost count. It's a fantastic game. I wish there'd be a sequel or like some kind of expansion on its ideas from that developer, same developer of Alien Hominid, whose name escapes me. But Castle Crashers is freaking awesome. It's just a game where you can play through in like 1 or 2 nights. And again, similar vein of Dynasty Warriors, you can just take out some aggression after a long day of work. In terms of Destiny 2, Beyond Light, and Lightfall, I am I would say most of the time fully retired Destiny veteran, but I returned to Destiny with unfinished business because the final expansion of this arc of storytelling that had been taking place over the last 10 years came out earlier this year, and that expansion was called The Final Shape. So I returned to Destiny with unfinished business. The final showdown with the Witness was here, and the Witness was the big bad that they'd been building up to over the last 10 years. I felt like I wanted to return to it and experience that ending because this game was such a gigantic part of the 2010s for me and so important to me and so many of my friends. I felt a sense of obligation to finish a journey that I had started 10 years ago. So I caught up with all the expansions. The only 2 expansions that I had not played was Beyond Light and Lightfall. Those are the previous 2 expansions before, and Witch Queen too. I forgot about Witch Queen. So those were the previous expansions before The Final Shape. I caught up with all those expansions, and while I did not count The Final Shape on this list, I did get to the end and fight the Witness, but there was a lot of content to the side and a lot of post-game content that I didn't do that I didn't feel like I had experienced the full expansion to be able to count it on my list of completed games. But I was satisfied that I'd returned and seen and kind of tied up a loose end of a game that I've been following, not as heavily for the last 3 or 4 years, but pretty extensively for the last 10 years of my life. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I don't have a lot of notes on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. My first Tony Hawk games were Tony Hawk's Underground 1 and 2, and I have a real soft spot for those games. I thought those were kind of like the pinnacle Tony Hawk experience, even though they kind of took more inspiration from like Jackass and Viva La Bam. But the first Tony Hawk game is pretty rough compared to the rest of the series. The first Pro Skater doesn't really have anything in it that I came to love about the Tony Hawk games. Like, has no manual, so you can like pull off insanely long combos, like to continue the manual and like manual over to a ramp and do something, and just all the crazy moves and stunts and shenanigans that would become to be known in the later Tony Hawk series. And so I felt like, well, it was probably like a good blueprint and concept for what the series would eventually become. I did not feel impressed with the first Tony Hawk game in any capacity, despite the fact that skateboarding was really big around that time and Tony Hawk was Pro Skater was very much like a result of that mid to late 90s skateboarding renaissance. It wasn't the only thing that made skateboarding popular. Skateboarding kind of came into its own, and all this adjacent media kind of sprung off from that. And that's just not Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I mean, Tony Hawk was obviously the face of skateboarding, the way that Michael Jordan was the face of basketball. But there were other things around that time that I think catapulted skateboarding and extreme sports as a whole into the spotlight. I mean, you had a show like Rocket Power on Nickelodeon that kind of came out at the same time. And then a couple years later, you had things like shows like Viva La Bam and then Nitro Circus and things like that that kind of sprung off of that afterwards. So I don't think Tony Hawk's Pro Skater gets all the credit for exploding skateboard onto the mainstream. I think it probably definitely helped, but I think skateboarding kind of arrived in the mid to late 90s, and all of this stuff kind of just exploded off of it because of that. And because we finally had a figure in skateboarding who kind of legitimized it in Tony Hawk. Sly Cooper was the second community game of the month. There's an episode out on this if you want to hear my thoughts, but man, Sly is a fantastic game. It's a great package in all aspects, and I got to do that episode with a good friend of the show, Poppy the Mask Keaton, so please go and give that one a listen. I had a lot of fun with Sly Cooper, and I'm definitely looking forward to playing the rest of the trilogy. I put Spider-Man 2 on here. Spider-Man 2 is actually the first game I finished this year. It kind of bled into the new year. I didn't get a chance to finish it before the end of the year. Spider-Man 2 is pretty good. I think I preferred the first Spider-Man, but that's been a common theme for me with all the sequels to like the first wave of those Sony PlayStation 4 games like God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, the first Spider-Man. I thought all those games' first iterations were better than their sequels, because when those first games came out, they kind of like took the world by storm and were kind of like the rival of what modern video game gameplay and storytelling was like. And a lot of that stuff was inspired by like what Uncharted did and what The Last of Us did earlier in the early 2010s and the late 2000s, right? So Uncharted and Last of Us, Naughty Dog kind of led the charge on that, and then all these other studios put out stuff like that. God of War 2018, the first Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, and I felt like all the sequels were traditional sequels. They didn't really improve on what the original games did by leaps and bounds. They fixed minor things and added enough there to make it feel like a new, unique experience, but they didn't quite blow my mind the way the first wave of those PS4 games did. And I think just because of that, I think of that first wave of PS4 games as better than their sequels, just because of how innovative and new and cutting edge they felt at the time. But Spider-Man 2, along with God of War Ragnarok, along with Horizon Forbidden West, like those feel very much like traditional video game sequels. And I think they're good for what they are. I just think I prefer that first group of those games as opposed to their sequels. Next category I have is titled This Shit Is Art, and this category only has 2 games just because I was kind of running out of where I need to put things, but one was Grease and the other was Journey. Grease was a game that I played for an episode with Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog, and Grease was a game that brought me to tears. It is an absolutely beautiful, stunning indie game that uses gameplay and presentation and music to represent the journey through the different stages of grief. It is absolutely a game that I would tell people to play if they ever wanted a convincing argument that video games are art. Grease is beautiful in every sense of the word. From a gameplay perspective, it doesn't do too much aside from like some puzzle solving and platforming here and there. but I don't think it has to because it's so beautiful in what it does and the themes it approaches, and that with the music and the color and everything that it does, it's absolutely stunning. And it choked me up and caused me to cry at the end of it. And it's hard to talk about now. I don't want to spoil it for you. I think you should definitely go and give it a playthrough. If there's like a list of indie games that you're like, how can these indie games compare to like these AAA experiences? Go and play Grease and tell me it makes you feel things that these other games do not make you feel in the least bit. It's absolutely incredible. And then I also played Journey for the first time this year, a game that I'd had on my backlog for an incredibly long time. Journey was actually the game I played after I finished Persona 5 Royal. I just needed something short as like a palate cleanser after playing a ton of really long JRPGs in a row. And Journey lived up to the hype that everybody had been constantly telling me how great it was. It's visually stunning. It's something you can complete in a couple of hours. There's a sense of like solitude about it, and then a sense of like excitement as you can encounter other players on this quote unquote journey that you're going through. I think it's something that has to be experienced rather than explained to you. So I won't attempt to explain Journey to you, but if you can come across it, it's on sale often enough. If you have the money, buy it, play it. It's worth a couple hours of your time. The final category that I have that I saved for you, I titled Backlog Marquee. And what this category is every year I go into the year with the intention of playing, like I select 4 or 5 games from my backlog that are like, these are the games that I'm going to play this year, no matter what. Most of the time I let my whims and kind of just my split second like gut decisions decide what I'm going to play next if I'm playing stuff from like a backlog or older video games. But this is a list of stuff that I go in and say I'm going to play these 4 or 5 games this year no matter what, because I've been putting them off for too long. So that is what my backlog marquee category is. And this category contains the following games: The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Inscription, Portal, Pentiment, and BioShock. These were the 5 games this year that I decided to play because I had been constantly told how great they were, and I'd had them on my backlog in various libraries for too long, and I figured it was time to finally play them. Especially the first one, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I wrote a whole script on this game. I made my first ever YouTube video on Ocarina of Time. This was a game that I missed growing up just because Zelda was not on my radar. I was playing Pokemon. I was playing other things. Just was not interested in what Zelda had to offer. After playing Breath of the Wild and fully becoming a Zelda fan in 2017, I've been trying to rectify my past sins and go back and play at least one Zelda game that I missed every single year until I've played the entire series. And finally, I was like, I have to play Ocarina of Time. I've been putting it off for too long. It's time to see what this game is all about. And I wrote a video essay on why I think Ocarina of Time is great, what I think its strengths are, what it meant to me. And to me, Ocarina is really a game about the struggles and sometimes terrors of growing up and being thrust into a world that you realize is suddenly much darker than the one that you had grown up in. And I think those themes are really quite fantastic. And then even for the time, to have a game like Ocarina of Time that was in 3D, that had fully 3D explorable areas that were filled with incredible surprises, secrets, areas you could unlock, and side quests and things to experience. You know, it would be very easy for me to go into Ocarina of Time and be like, this didn't live up to the outrageous hype that I've been getting for 20 years. But I think if you go back and look at it, the game, what it's trying to tell you, at the time it was made, I think Ocarina is a seminal video game title. It is one of the most important games that's ever been made, and I can see why people hold it in such high regard. Inscription was the second game. I've had Inscription in my Steam library for way too long, and holy shit, I thought I knew what this game was about, and I had no idea that the game kept going past like the initial card playing section that you have when you're like in the room with the creepy guy and you only see his eyes. The game is so much more than that, and I was not prepared for that, and it was delightful, and just all the things that you discover in this game are delightful and chilling and creepy. It's so atmospheric, and I fucking hate card games. I hate any game that you have to play cards in, and I thought Inscription was one of the best experiences I had this entire year. It's absolutely incredible. I don't want to say too much more on it because I think it's worth experiencing it for yourself. So go check out Inscription if you have the time. Portal. Mother effing Portal. I've been putting this game off for so long. I've been putting off all the gigantic Valve games for so long. Last year, I finally got around to playing Half-Life. This year, I finally got around to playing Portal. And yeah, I get it. Portal lives up to all the expectations that I had for it. It's a fantastic puzzle game that uses the simple element of being able to open two portals and uses that in so many unique ways that I never even expected to be able to use it in to solve puzzles and advance through this game. Portal's great. I'm probably going to play the sequel next year. Pentiment. Pentiment was another game that I'd been putting off, and ever since I'd seen it at some Xbox presentation, and I think my good friend Rick Firestone from Pixel Project Radio had talked about it, this was a game that I wanted to check out. I'm not usually like a visual novel type of narrative guy. I played very few of them, but Pentiment was fascinating, especially since it deals with a lot of themes with like religion and the church in the Middle Ages and what life was like back then. And I grew up going to a religious school and very involved with a church scenario. So I found the themes and the things in Pentiment very compelling, and caused me to reflect a lot on that period of my life. And it's a gripping story too, set in an era that, you know, the church was the dominant power. And finally, BioShock. I'd played BioShock Infinite when it came out, and that was my only experience with BioShock. So I picked up the BioShock Remastered Edition on sale this year, and I decided it was finally time to discover the city of Rapture. And this was another one that I had high expectations for. And yeah, I get why people sing the praises of this game. It creates such an incredible atmosphere in the underwater city of Rapture. It's very disturbing. Even in parts that aren't like destroyed or filled with crazy people, you just get the feeling the whole time based on like the audio logs you pick up and like exploring the underwater city that this stuff is not right here. There's just an eerie sensation that permeates the game throughout. It kind of reminded me of the atmosphere of a Metroid game, especially Metroid Fusion, where this kind of overarching sense of dread throughout the entire game. And as you discover the source of that dread and you get the big twist at the end, right? The would you kindly, I think it tackles a lot of themes that are relevant, especially to the things that we're going through today. So yeah, BioShock was an experience that I picked my backlog marquee games good this year because each of these 5 games that I picked for this year to be the ones that I wanted to play, I had very high expectations for, and a lot of them surprised me, and I love the way that they presented themselves. So BioShock was just the cap on that trend for sure. On the game portion of this a bit unceremoniously by telling you my game of the year. I didn't play that many games from 2024. I think there were only a handful that I mentioned on that list. Balatro, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Echoes of Wisdom, and maybe a couple other in there. Sonic X Shadow Generations. And I know there were a lot more experiences that I missed out on this year, but I think just giving everything that I went through, arbitrarily, I'd probably give my game of the year to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It was the game I spent the most time with. It was the game that I was the most invested in. It is a continuation of the exploration of the world of Final Fantasy VII, which I am very curious to see how they're going to wrap up the trilogy. So I think I would give my game of the year to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I don't need to go and do a whole spiel about it. If I was to pick a game that wasn't from 2024 from this year that I would say that I enjoyed playing the most, or was like the marquee experience for my entire year, I don't know necessarily what that would be. Soul Calibur is one that I think that sticks out. Suikoden 2 is one that I think that sticks out for sure. And yeah, I don't really know. So I'll just leave it to my 2024 game of the year, and we'll call that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now we can get into the second half of this episode. I wanted to talk about, before I left you, some of my reflections on the Unlockables and on content creation in general, because as it seems with every single year that I've done this show, there's been new challenges to overcome, new ways to think about doing the show. And this year more than ever, I think I've questioned, am I doing things the right way to be doing this kind of creative output? Because let's face it, the major thing that happened to me this year is I became a father. And because of that, I've had less time than ever to play games as Cam has started moving around. It was easier the first 6 or 7 months he was born because he wasn't doing very much. He would just sit in one spot, or he could sit on my lap, or I could hold him while I would play games on the PlayStation, on the TV, or on the Steam Deck. But the last 3 months, he's started moving around. He has not stayed in one spot. And that's been incredibly difficult to feel like I can sit with him and spend time with him while playing video games at the same time. And the way his bedtime habits have shifted, my video game time usually came at the end of the day when everyone would go to bed. I would stay up for a couple more hours and play video games. Then I would go to sleep, and I would get up with him in the morning and do a feeding and get him back to sleep. And then maybe have a couple more hours to play video games before I went to work. And now that his sleep schedule is changing, and now that he's constantly moving around where he requires 100% of my attention all the time, I have less time than ever to play games. I was probably able to finish the 51 games I played this year because he was not moving. In the time that he has been moving around, I have finished maybe 1 or 2 games. So it's really cutting into my ability to play games. And I don't run the kind of show where I don't want to do an episode on things unless I have played the game. I will always defer to playing the game first before I try to do an episode on something, even if it's something I've already played, because I want to have that experience fresh in my memory. So I very much built a show that requires me to be able to play video games, and I'm having less time than ever to play them. Because of this, I have learned to maximize the efficiency of the time that I do have. So I brought the show back in August or September, and he hadn't been moving around as much, but in the middle of the show's, this kind of season of the Unlockables, this 4-month run where I've been able to put out a show every single week, is when Cameron really started moving around a lot. And that's when I'll be honest with you guys, the last month or so, I've been struggling to get episodes out every single week. and fulfill the schedule that I set for myself, just because I used to be able to sit there and play a game while he was sitting there. I used to be able to sit there and edit on my laptop while he was sitting there, or he was sitting by me. And now that he's moving around and getting into things, that's not possible. The last 3 weeks, I've submitted the episode for the Tuesday the night before it was scheduled to go live. And I've really been trying to learn how to maximize the efficiency of the time that I do have. And that time is coming more and more on the margins of my day every time. And the only time I'm finding any time to be able to actually do those things, whether it's play games or edit episodes, is by cutting into my sleep. That is the only time left that I can cut into anywhere that I have the time to be able to play a game or edit an episode or interact with a Discord community or whatever it is that I'm doing in relation to the Unlockables. And that's been difficult because I value my personal time and I value the time that I have to pursue my interests and pursue my hobbies. And I knew with having a kid that it would be more challenging and that I have to be less selfish with my time, right? It's obviously a baby that requires my attention, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I had the kid. I have to come to terms with the fact that more of my time is demanded of him than of my personal hobbies. But I've still wanted to find a way to retain some level of the things that I like to do because making the Unlockables is therapeutic for me. It's something that I really enjoy doing. Playing a video game is therapeutic to me. It's a way that I can blow off steam. It's a way that I can escape from the world for a little bit. It's something that I have constantly done throughout my life, and that video games have been there for me in the most difficult of times. And now I find that time consistently on the margins of my day, whether that's late at night or early in the morning. And I'm trying to figure out how to maximize the efficiency of the time I do had to get in time to edit, to make sure my wife has time, to make sure my kid has time, to make sure I can play the games that I still want to make sure that I can put out the content that I feel like I'm proud of. And that's created a lot of anxiety for me once again, because I brought the show back in September and I wanted to put out episodes every single week for at least like the last 4 months of the year to see if this was something that was sustainable while having a family. And it's something that I felt like I had to do because that's what other shows have been doing. They put out a consistent amount of stuff on a consistent, regular basis. And my show has been pretty irregular compared to a lot of my friends, my contemporaries. And I've actually found myself negatively like comparing myself to those shows because they have been putting out stuff consistently for years. And I feel like I haven't been able to do that. And I know for a fact that that's affected my show negatively. And this kind of ties into 2 points I want to make here. The first thing that I have been trying to come to terms with is that my show can't be other shows, and that's okay. Because a lot of the other shows that I compare myself to have a lot of advantages over me that I don't have in terms of lifestyle, right? They don't have kids. They don't have demanding work schedules. They have more time to devote to their hobbies, their likes, these projects that we work on. And I constantly find myself wanting to be the show that puts out something every week so there's something new for everybody to listen to. But the more that I try to commit to that, the more difficult my life seems to be. And I'm trying to come to terms with the fact that my show can't be those other shows. And that's okay. I have to be okay with putting out things when I feel like I can put them out. And I have to feel like I'm okay accepting that my show is smaller than most of those other shows. When in reality, I feel like my show is or should be bigger than it actually is. And I find myself wishing it was more successful rather than just accepting that it is successful on the terms that I define for myself. Because I constantly get all this positive feedback from so many people that they love my show and it feels like it's incredible, it's amazing, and all this stuff. And so many people have played Kingdom Hearts by listening to my show now, and I really love that. And a part of me is really, really grateful for that, but there's also a tiny part of me that is like selfish and also self-sabotaging. And I'm like, well, if all you people are telling me my show is so great, then why isn't it bigger? Why isn't it more successful? Why isn't it reaching more people like I know it could? But it doesn't seem to be doing that. And that's something that I've really struggled with because I feel like I have a good voice. I feel like I speak pretty well. I know that sometimes my mouth runs faster than my brain and I trip over my words, but I feel like that's a result of my passion for the topic, my passion for video games, that I just get so excited about it that I can't contain myself and I just talk faster than I can think about words or think about sentences. But I feel like when I compare myself to most other people, I feel like I do just as good as them. I feel like I talk as good as them. I feel like the way I structure things and then my editing process and the quality of the show that I put out is on par with what everybody else is able to put out. And I just keep finding myself frustrated, and it's like a self-sabotaging thing where I think I should be better than I actually am. And it kind of affects me negatively to the point where it's like, well, maybe people are just being nice to me, or maybe people are just lying to me when they tell me that they like what I do or that I do a good job. I get really big imposter syndrome when it comes to this stuff. But at the same time, I also feel like it should be doing better than it actually is. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's like, I'm like, there's no way I'm actually good at this. But then some days I'll wake up and be like, yeah, I am actually good at this. Like, why isn't this better? Why isn't this as good as I actually think it is? So it's been a weird headspace that I've been in with all this other stuff, trying to come to terms with the fact that I am very rapidly approaching having my second child. And I just know going forward, I am not going to have time next year to play 50 games. I am not going to have time next year to put out episodes every single week for a year straight. It's not possible. It's just not possible. And I think there's a part of me that is afraid of that and afraid that my show will be forgotten and I'll be left behind because I'm not able to put out a constant stream of stuff. And that really scares me. I know it might seem silly because obviously being a dad is the most important thing in the world to me. And I love my son absolutely more than anything. And I'm still trying to learn how to accept this new identity for myself as being a dad, and just accept that the things that I work on come second now. I also feel like I've failed in terms of community as well, because I know one of the areas that I struggle with that would lead to more sustained success is if I put more of an effort into building a community. I always joke at the end of every episode when I promote my show that my Discord is dead, and I tell people to join it anyways. And I'm like, you're better off in the other Discords because my Discord is just dead. I could definitely do a better job on Discord of fostering conversation and fostering a larger community. And I just don't, because I don't feel like I have the time to do that. If I'm focusing my already limited time on the things I want to do, I want to play video games and I want to work on my show. And building the community aspect of it just seems exhausting to me, just because at the end of the day, after being at work and dealing with people all day and then coming home and devoting my emotional energy to my son and playing with him and then finally getting them off to bed, the last thing I want to do is spend the remainder of my time giving more of my energy to people in a chat room. I know that sounds terrible because I love every single person that I've met doing this and had on the show this year and across time, and all the projects I've worked on have been some of the most incredible people that I've met in my entire life. Complete strangers that I've never even met in person are some of the most incredible people. And I love each and every one of you and the support you've given me to this show. But I know that me choosing to not engage as much in all these various Discords and all these chat rooms just because I don't have that time, or I'm emotionally spent, or I don't want to, definitely affects the overall success of my show. And I know that a common theme for anything that is successful is that they've built a robust community that they interact with. And I haven't done that. And I haven't put forth the time or the energy to do that, just because at the end of the day, I don't feel like I have that energy to give. And even if I do have that energy to give, I guess I'm selfish with it. I'm either going to give it to my son, or when they go to bed, I'm going to save that energy for myself and put it towards playing a game or working on my show. So the community aspect of this is something that I have not done as well as other people. So I guess I have to look at the reality of my situation and ask myself, how do I continue to build and be creative as my free time continues to shrink, as I expect that it will with the introduction of a second baby? And I don't want it to come off like you guys like you guys think I'm saying, oh, my children are taking all of my time and I can't play video games or work on my show, because that's not what it is. But the show has come to represent something that I've always wanted in life. I've always wanted to be a part of video games. I've wanted to make that something that I could eventually, like, one day live off of, because it's the thing I'm most passionate about in my entire life. And I didn't find that I could go into the video game industry proper in any single way. A, because I self-sabotage myself. 2, because I don't think I'm creative enough. And 3, I just didn't chase the right avenues to be able to be part of that industry. And so this is kind of like my outreach to be able to attempt to be a part of that conversation, be a part of the video game community. And yes, it's something that I want to be successful and reach greater heights. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that ambition, but I am quickly coming to the realization that to scale Unlockables to greater heights in its current iteration, with the amount of time that I spend on gigantic projects like Kingdom Hearts, or researching things, or having to play games, or anything like that, is simply not sustainable. And I am not the type of show that will have episodes every single week. And I have to figure out how I define success for myself outside of that weekly model. And I have to find a way to define success outside of being able to build a robust community centered around me as the person of interest. A, because I don't want myself to be the center of a community, because I don't feel like I'm worthy of that in any capacity. And B, I've always viewed myself and positioned my show as the one you could listen to with no strings attached, right? You don't have to tie yourself to a community built by me. If you want to just come and listen to the show every week and not engage and just listen to what I have to say because you enjoy it or whatever, you can absolutely do that. I know that a larger part of my listenership is in this silent majority, because I look at the numbers and just compared to how many people interact with me, follow me on socials, versus who's actually listening to what I put out and the countries that they're coming from and all that statistics and stuff, I know that a large majority of my audience is that silent majority and listens to me for that no strings attached purpose. Just coming here and listening to something interesting, whether it's background noise or whatever. You don't have to tie yourself into engaging to feel like you're a part of the community. And that's really kind of what I've built my show on, as I've realized I don't have the time to build that community aspect of my show as much as I want to. So I have to figure out, all these things are like things rotating in my head, because I know that I've retired and come out of retirement more than Tom Brady, more than Michael Jordan. And every year it seems like the fate of this show in particular has been on the chopping block where I've felt it teetering on the brink of me not having enough time to devote to it or not being able to do it in the way I want to. So I don't do it at all, and I should just shut it down. So that's really the battle I've been fighting with myself since the Unlockables inception. Is I know the potential the show has, but to reach that potential in the current format, it would require a vast majority of my free time that I simply just don't have. So I have to find a way to fulfill the potential of the show as I see it in my mind in the circumstances that I currently have in my life. And don't get me wrong, if there's ever a point where the Unlockables just becomes too much and it's too much of a burden on everybody around me or my free time, it will go away. This show is nothing compared to the time I have with my son while he is young, with my wife, with my family, with my friends. Like, this is nothing. But still, this is something that is important to me in my heart. So if I want it to work, which I do want it to remain around, I have to figure out how to realize its potential as I see it with the circumstances that I currently have in my life. And that's been an ever-evolving challenge as I've navigated getting married and having a child and switching jobs and working crazy hours. So I have not been able to yet figure out how that works. But my goal for the show is for it to be around and not to go away. It's just that it's been hard for me to think that this show could be a success without putting out an episode every week as like the standard podcaster model and putting out stuff sporadically. And that's, I think, what's held me back from doing the work to try and figure out how can my show be successful in a different way and on different terms than what other people have had success with. And that's been difficult. It's been part of my evaluation of my entire person, of my entire being, of the way I think and the way I feel this year. When you have a kid come into this life, when you have a child, it makes you re-question and reevaluate every single thing that you thought that you knew in life. And it's been a really big turning point. And it's been a lot of fun too, because getting to see something that you created, a human life, learn how to eat and crawl and discover the wonders of the world for the first time is something so indescribable that me trying to describe it to you won't do it justice. You have to experience it for yourself. But it's come with me having to learn how to be less selfish with my time and still try to retain the time that I want to on my hobby of playing games and my hobby of putting out a creative show like this. They've come into conflict, and I have to figure out how to do both. And if I come to a conclusion that I cannot do both, if I feel like it's taking away time from the things that are truly important in this life, then the show will be gone. And that's something that I would have to come to terms with. But for like the immediate future of the show, I don't want the show to go away. And I want to figure out how I can continue to pursue this passion in a responsible way that is not taking time away from my loved ones. So I think after this episode, after December wraps up, we're going to go into my usual winter break that I take until spring gets here. And I don't think I'm ever going to return to the weekly release model of episodes for the Unlockables, just because that's not the way that I don't think that's how. I don't think I'll have the time to commit to that. I don't think that I do. And I think that my show, I put so much time and research into notes and writing stuff that I'd never want to compromise what I view as the quality of my show to put out something lesser if it meant putting it out every single week. I'd rather put out less higher quality things than more lower quality things. So it's more of a quality over quantity type of thing. So I think for the future, what I've been thinking of is I'm going to do less weekly episodes on just talking about games and stuff. I think I'm really going to dive into the story of video games aspect of my tagline. And once Kingdom Hearts wraps up, which is my intention to wrap up Kingdom Hearts either at the end of this month or in January, we'll have that break. And I want to start working on some other mini series that will exist within the confines of the Unlockables, just not to the extent that Kingdom Hearts was. Maybe some more singular mini series on specific games or specific topics that can go like 3 to 4 episodes that I can flesh out really well and write like a really well thought out research script that will take like 3 to 4 episodes. And I'll just release mini series on things that I think are interesting stories or interesting people or interesting games in the community, in the industry. And I might be able to do like a handful of these really high quality mini series a year, but I think that would fit the goal of my show better with the amount of time that I have in my life. It also wouldn't require me to feel like I have to play so many video games throughout the year, and maybe I could focus more on specific games in my backlog or specific games relating to the topics that I want to talk about. So I think that's a little bit about how I intend for the future of the show to go. I do know that after this, I'm going on my winter break so I can work on other stuff and get the year started off right and focus on my son's first birthday coming up and focus on this second child that's going to be coming into our life as well. Those are my top priorities right now. But the future of the show, it's my intention to continue it probably in that fashion. And then we'll probably have to see and go from there. I'm sure the show will take some kind of other evolution next year as I navigate not only having one child, but 2 children. And again, I know that I've been kind of contemplative and reminiscent on like my anxieties around the show and stuff, but the show is a big deal to me. And it's something that I've come to really love and appreciate. And the people that I've met, I've come to love and appreciate, all of them as well. And that's something that I don't just want to give up and go away and never be heard from ever again. But I will find a way to keep the show going in some capacity. And it'll have to be in a way that I define as successful on my terms and a way that I can be at peace, not doing what I feel like other people have done to make them successful. Because I'm not other people at the end of the day. I'm me. And my show is an extension of me. Speaking of my show, I do want to end this with saying thank you to so many of you that have made 2024 an incredible experience. A year that is probably the most challenging year of my life so far, but a year that is also the most incredible year of my life so far in terms of every aspect, in terms of my fulfillment in my relationship with my wife, in terms of getting to learn and love my son, and in terms of interacting and working with so many of you that I'm in these communities with, that have listened to my show, that have reached out to me and said, hey, you're the reason I started playing Kingdom Hearts. All of that. I have to I cannot thank you enough. I love each and every one of you. You have been such an unexpected but incredible addition to my life in a era of my life that I was not looking or expecting to make so many new friends or meet so many new people. Usually around this time, your friend circles shrink and you tend to see people and interact with people less and less. But since I started this show 2 years ago, the exact opposite has happened. And I've met and interacted and talked to so many incredible people that I wouldn't have ever known existed if I didn't start doing this show. That's been one of the most rewarding things about life over the past couple of years, is meeting all of you. And you've all had such wonderful things to say to me personally. And the number of times you've told me I do great work and, you love having me on your shows. It's still something that I struggle with a bit because I have massive imposter syndrome. I don't feel like the thing that I do is that spectacular. I feel like anybody could buy a microphone and do the same thing if they just take a little bit of time to do it. So I don't place a lot of value personally. Like I said, it's imposter syndrome. I don't place a lot of value personally on what I do. And I tend not to believe people when they give me compliments just because I don't feel worthy. But the reception to the stuff I've done has been incredible, especially the Kingdom Hearts stuff, because that was something that I started sheerly because I got sick and tired of seeing tweets on the internet saying Kingdom Hearts is stupid because it doesn't make any sense. And I wanted to put forth my full best effort to explaining the series and explaining why I love it so much. And I didn't know what kind of response I would get from the people putting that out, because I very much have felt like an ambassador for Kingdom Hearts to our community that we find ourselves in here, this podcasting video game community. That reception has been incredible. The Kingdom Hearts series is by and far the most successful thing on my show, and it's incredible. And I didn't think people would care about it. And I feel like there's a large silent majority of people that have listened to the Kingdom Hearts series and just have not interacted. And I think that's fine. It's fantastic. That's the whole reason that I made it, is so you can listen to it. And it's really a culmination and a representation of what I think is my favorite part about my show. And it really represents the passion I have towards video games in general. So thank you again for interacting with that Kingdom Hearts series and listening to a madman ramble about Nomura for 40 hours of his life. I can't wait to talk to you more in 2025. I can't wait to collaborate with you all more. I love you all so much. I hope you have the best possible new year that you can possibly have. I know that there are incredible things waiting for all of you in 2025, despite the fact that we're going into somewhat unprecedented times, considering those of us who live in the United States. I am here for you. I love you. I hope you know that I am a friend and an ally, and if you need a place to come just to escape the world for a little while, I will do my best to offer an unbounding font of positivity and optimism whenever I can give it to you, just so that you can escape from the dark, dreary, the horrible direction that our world seems to be going in. That is what I want to be able to provide for you. So there are great things coming for all of us, and I know that together we can to make the world just a positive and better place. So I will sign off by saying, remember, it's not just the story of video games, it is the story of you. Happy New Year, and can't wait to see you in 2025.